We're joined on the eve of Alexandra Matvichuk's acceptance speech of the Nobel Peace Prize with Alexandra, a Ukrainian human rights lawyer, civil rights leader who's joining us from Kyiv, Ukraine. She, of course, heads the nonprofit organization, the Center for Civil Liberties, and has been an active campaigner and advocate for democratic reforms and accountability for Russian war crimes in this horrific war in Ukraine. Alexandra, first, congratulations again on the Nobel Peace Prize, which your organization, the Center for Civil Liberties, along with our good friend Alice Bialievsky from Belarus and the Russian human rights organization Memorial, are being recognized tomorrow. Congratulations, Lexia.
Thank you.
I want to kick off with a conversation. One key part of your work has been how to seek accountability for human rights violations at the international level. So I want to start by asking you to share, what is your vision for accountability and justice at the international level? What should that look like?
We must change approach to war crime justice. The war turned people into the numbers. And I started notice from myself that I myself started to speak more with numbers than with names, because the scale of war crimes grows so large that it's become impossible to recognize all stories. And that's why we need justice. We need justice for all victims of war crimes, regardless of who they are, their social role, what types of crime they endured, and whether or not media is interested in their cases. Because we must return people their names, because the life of each person matters.
That's so beautifully put, Alexandra. One of the things that you've argued for is that you thought that Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that it could potentially be a stimulus for prompting change, particularly in the United Nations, to improve its ability to respond effectively to human rights abuses. We've seen Russia, China stymie these efforts at the United Nations in the past. What reforms, what first steps would you like to see the international community and democracies take to bolster the UN approach?
First of all, we have to change our mindset. What do I mean? Now we face with a large-scale Russian invasion. And I, as a human rights lawyer, which have experience of 20 years to using the law to defend people, have no legal instrument for current moment how to stop Russian atrocities. And when I applied to international organization or international governments with this problem, they always answered, this is problem because Putin regime is ignore international law and don't fulfill the decision of international organizations. But I would like to put the following question. Maybe it's wrong something with the international system of peace and security, which allows Russia to violate international law and not fulfill decision of international organizations for so long. Maybe we have to be honest and to say that something wrong with us, because the whole international system of peace and security now lays in ruin, like Ukrainian Mariupol. And we have to start a complex reform of it in order to provide a guarantee to each people who live in different countries, regardless of whether or not their countries are members of some powerful military blocs or their military potential. And we have to start this reform with exclude Russia from UN Security Council.
So that's a bold idea, bold vision. What do you see as the challenges for making these reforms a reality and ensuring accountability at the international level for Russia, for Vladimir Putin, given what we've seen from Moscow's longstanding efforts to undermine both these international norms, but also the international institutions?
The most barriers is a culture of impunity, because this health and this level of pain, which we faced in Ukraine, in this war which Russia launched 8 years ago, it's a result of total impunity which Russia enjoyed for decades. Because for decades, Russian troops committed war crimes in Chechnya, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Mali, in Syria, in Libya, and they have never been punished for this. They have never been punished even for using chemical weapons against civilians in Syria. And Russia believes they can do whatever they wanted. We must break the circle of impunity. We must establish international tribunal and hold Putin, Lukashenko, and other war criminals accountable. And one more important point. Last century, the civilized world made a significant step to establish law and justice, and Nazi war criminals were tried on Nuremberg trials after Nazi regime had collapsed. But we live in a new century. Justice must be independent of the magnitude of Putin's regime. We cannot wait. We must establish international tribunal now and hold perpetrators accountable.
You've also observed that the Nobel Award is a recognition of the power of civil society. So how do you think civil society organizations like yours, others across Ukraine that are doing such important work, how can they promote democratic principles inside international organizations and resist this authoritarian influence? What kinds of support do these organizations need to be effective at the international level?
A lot of human rights defenders around the world do their work with extremely bravery. And I must, to be honest, that our voice, the voice of human rights defenders from our part of the world, wasn't heard. Maybe we was heard in HDM, OSCE, or in UN Committee on Human Rights, but not in the rooms where political decisions were taking place. Russia persecuted their own Russian civil society for a long of years. They killed journalists, they jailed human rights defenders, they persecute peaceful protesters. But even well-developed democracies continued to do business as usual with Russia. Then Russia started aggressive war 8 years ago against Ukraine and occupied part of Donetsk and Luhansk region, as well as annexed Crimea. And it was the first time after the Second World War in our part of the world when one independent country officially annexed part of another independent country. But still, the reaction was very weak. And for 8 years, I personally worked with the cases of a horrible torture, sexual violence, and killings with civilians endure in the Russian captivity. And we said numerous reports about this, but nobody was interested in these cases in such level to stop this. So the main thesis is that human rights and peace has very inextricable connection. And we have taken into account human rights so seriously as we take economic issues or some security issues. And we have to base our political decisions also on human rights basis, because state which systematically violates human rights obligation sooner or later become a threat to the whole region.
That's right. I think we have seen when authoritarians attack their own people, we understand that they are a threat to their neighbors, as is playing out in Ukraine. Alexandra, you've told me that the Nobel Peace Prize really is a means to amplify your voice, the voice of your organization, the message that you want to send. So on the eve of your acceptance speech of this prize, what is your message to share with others like you, others activists around the world that feel enormous challenges, obstacles, barriers to reaching their vision for justice and peace? What is your message to them?
In different parts of the world, human rights defenders not working in human rights field. They are fighting for human rights, for freedom, and for human dignity. And very often they faced with enormous challenges. And sometimes to see that their efforts has no senses because they counteract with the whole state machine. But the truth is that we have to continue our fight honestly, and result will unexpectedly be achieved.
Alexandra, that's beautiful. Let me just close by you're joining us from Kyiv. The country has been facing extraordinary missile rocket attacks. In some respects, since the Russian retreat from Kherson, we've seen a doubling down on a Russian strategy to attack civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. How do you see this phase of the war, and what does it mean for Russia's culpability for war crimes?
Russia uses war crimes as the methods of warfare. Russia tried to break people's resistance and occupy the country by the tool which I call the immense pain of civilian population. And in this attack to critical civil infrastructure across the country, Russia clearly proves that they use terroristic tactics in order to provide more suffering to civilians. But I have no doubt that Ukrainians will endure. Yes, we have very often no light, no electricity, no internet, no water, but we have a light of our hearts, and we have a light of our belief. We all know for what we are fighting for in this war with Russia. We are fighting for freedom. We are fighting for our dignity, and we live in a very interconnected world. We know that we have to stop Putin in Ukraine, because if we will not be able to stop Putin in Ukraine, he will go further.
Alexandra, thank you so much. I'm just so honored to be with you. Thank you for your work, your voice, your tireless commitment to this cause, which is yielding dividends for justice around the world. I will never forget when you joined the National Endowment for Democracy board to brief our board members from a bomb shelter in Kyiv. At the beginning of the war, you've shown determination and courage, and we're proud to stand with you, to stand in support of your work. Thank you. Please be safe, and we wish you all the best success, Lesia.
Thank you.